The conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command fell silent as the woman in the flight suit walked through the door. She carried no briefcase, no portfolio, just a weathered helmet bag with faded squadron patches and a call sign stenciled in silver. Widow. The Navy SEAL leaning against the mahogany table noticed her first. Lieutenant Commander Briggs, freshly returned from Kandahar with a chest full of commendations and an ego to match. He nudged the operator beside him and smirked. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "You lost. Flight attendant briefing is down the hall." A few chuckles rippled through the assembled special operations personnel. The woman didn't flinch. She moved to the far end of the table, set down her helmet bag with deliberate care, and met Briggs' eyes with a gaze that could have cut steel. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said quietly. Her voice carried no anger, no defensiveness, just a calm certainty that made the laughter die in throats. Briggs wasn't finished. He straightened up, crossing his arms over his tactical vest. Okay, my bad, so what's your rank then?" "Ensign, Lieutenant JG." He said it like a joke, like her presence here was the setup to a punchline only he understood. Before she could answer, the door at the opposite end opened. A two-star admiral entered, followed by three captains and a civilian in a dark suit with a Pentagon badge. Every operator in the room snapped to attention, every operator except her. She simply turned, and the admiral met her eyes with something that looked like relief. "Commander Kes Merrick," the admiral said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Thank you for getting here so fast." Briggs' face went pale. "Commander, not lieutenant, not some fresh-faced nugget pilot. A full commander, which meant she outranked half the people in this room." The admiral moved to the head of the table and pulled a folder marked with diagonal red stripes. "Alpha Priority." The words were stamped across it in block letters that seemed to pulse with urgency. "6 hours ago," the admiral began, "we lost contact with Operation Sandglass. 12 SEALs, 2 agency assets, embedded 30 miles inside denied territory. Their last transmission was a single word: compromise." He opened the folder and pulled out a satellite image. It showed a compound in a mountain valley, surrounded by terrain so hostile it looked like the surface of another planet. "Every exfil option we have is either too slow or too loud. We need someone who can thread a needle in a hurricane." The admiral looked directly at Commander Merrick. "We need Widow." The room remained frozen as the admiral slid the satellite imagery across the polished table. Commander Kes Merrick leaned forward, her eyes scanning the topography with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent a decade reading terrain from 15,000 feet. The valley was a death trap. Sheer cliffs on 3 sides, a single narrow approach from the east that funneled directly into overlapping fields of fire. Whoever had planned Operation Sandglass had either been brilliant or desperate. Probably both. "Environmental conditions?" Merrick asked, her voice level. One of the captains stepped forward, activating the wall display. Weather data cascaded across the screen in angry reds and oranges. "Deteriorating rapidly. Crosswinds gusting to 40 knots in the valley. Visibility dropping. We're expecting a dust storm to hit the region within 8 hours." Briggs finally found his voice again, though it had lost its earlier swagger. "Commander, with all due respect, even our MH-60s can't operate in those conditions. The downdrafts alone would slam a helicopter into the mountainside." Merrick didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the satellite image, on the compound where 12 operators were counting down the minutes until enemy reinforcements arrived. "Good thing I'm not flying a helicopter then." The civilian from the Pentagon spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried weight. "Commander Merrick has been read into Operation Threadbare. She's current on the platform and has more hours in extreme terrain than anyone in the naval aviation community." He paused, letting that sink in. "She's also the only pilot who successfully completed a combat extraction from this specific valley." That got everyone's attention. Briggs stared at her with new eyes, the pieces finally clicking together. "Widow." He'd heard that call sign before, whispered in ready rooms and debriefed in classified after-action reports. The pilot who'd pulled 6 Marines out of a hot LZ in the Hindu Kush when every other bird had turned back. the aviator who'd threaded an Osprey through a canyon so narrow her wingtips had scraped rock. "That was you," one of the other SEALs said, his voice tinged with something like awe. "Objective Copper, 2019. Merrick's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Memory maybe, or ghosts, different valley, same mountains." The Admiral cleared his throat. "Commander, I won't sugarcoat this. It's a suicide mission by any conventional metric, but these men don't have conventional options left. I'm asking, not ordering." For the first time since entering the room, Merrick allowed herself a thin smile. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who'd already made their choice before walking through the door. "When do I launch?" The Admiral checked his watch. "Aircraft's being prepped now. You'll have a 2-hour window between the current patrol pattern and the storm front. Miss that window and those operators are on their own." Merrick picked up her helmet bag. As she moved toward the door, Briggs stepped forward. "Commander, I apologize for earlier. That was unprofessional." She paused, turned back. For a moment, the hard lines of her face softened just slightly. "You're not the first, Lieutenant Commander. Won't be the last." Her eyes held his. "But those men in that valley, they don't care about rank or gender or who said what in a briefing room. They care about one thing, whether the bird coming for them can make it through the mountains. Everything else is just noise." The flight line at Naval Air Station Fallon was a symphony of controlled chaos. Maintainers swarmed around the aircraft like ants around a queen, their movements precise and purposeful despite the ticking clock. Merrick walked across the tarmac, her boots hitting concrete that still radiated heat from the Nevada sun. The aircraft waiting for her wasn't what most people expected when they thought of military rescue operations. The CV-22 Osprey sat on the hardstand like a mechanical raptor, its tiltrotor nacelles angled upward in conversion mode. Unlike the standard gray paint scheme, this one was darker, almost black, with low visibility markings that seemed to absorb light. Sensors and antennae bristled from its fuselage like quills. This wasn't a rescue bird. It was a ghost. Staff Sergeant Koa Reyes, her crew chief, met her at the ramp. He was built like a fire hydrant, with hands that could strip an engine and a loyalty that had kept Merrick alive through 3 combat deployments. "Boss, we're 95%, he said, his Hawaiian accent softening the military brevity. "Running final diagnostics on the terrain following system now. Weather's going to be sporty." Merrick climbed into the cockpit, her hands automatically beginning the pre-flight ritual. Switches, gauges, circuit breakers, each one a small prayer against the mechanical gods of aviation. "Sporty is my specialty, Koa." In the right seat, her co-pilot was already deep in the navigation system. Captain Marcus Webb, call sign static, was a former Air Force combat search and rescue pilot who'd cross-trained to the Osprey specifically to fly with Merrick. He had a reputation for being unflappable and a talent for electronic warfare that bordered on supernatural. "Routes programmed," Webb said without looking up. "But I'm not going to lie, Kess. This profile is tighter than anything we've run. The terrain masking barely gives us 15 seconds of straight flight before the next turn. One mistake and we're a crater." Merrick's hands moved across the overhead panel, bringing systems online. The Osprey's engines began their characteristic whine, building toward the roar that would shake the airframe. "Then we don't make mistakes." Through the cockpit window, she could see a small group gathering near the hangar. The Admiral was there, along with the Pentagon civilian and the SEAL team leaders. But it was Briggs who stood slightly apart, his arms crossed, watching the aircraft with an expression Merrick couldn't quite read. Respect maybe, or fear, possibly both. The tower came through on the radio, crisp and professional. "Widow flight, you're cleared to active. Winds 270 at 15, gusting 22. Altimeter 3012. Webb keyed the mic. "Tower, Widow copies, requesting direct departure to the east." As Merrick's hands moved to the thrust levers, Ray's voice came through the internal comms from the cargo bay. "Ramp secure, cabin secure. We're green across the board." The Osprey shuddered as power fed into the massive rotor systems. Slowly, with a grace that defied its bulk, the aircraft lifted from the tarmac. The nacelles began their rotation, transitioning from helicopter mode to airplane configuration. Below, the group near the hangar grew smaller. Merrick caught one last glimpse of Briggs, still watching, still trying to reconcile the woman he'd mocked with the legend now disappearing into the darkening sky. The sun was setting behind them, painting the Nevada desert in shades of amber and rust. Ahead, mountains rose like teeth, and beyond them, a valley where 12 men waited in the gathering darkness, listening for the sound of rotors that might never come. The Osprey ate miles like a hungry ghost. Merrick kept the aircraft low, following terrain contours that would keep them below radar coverage. The cockpit was bathed in red light, preserving night vision while Webb worked the navigation system with the intensity of a surgeon. Outside, the world had transformed into a monochrome landscape of shadows and starlight. "Approaching the border in 5 minutes," Webb announced. His voice was steady, but Merrick could hear the tension underneath. They were about to cross from friendly airspace into what the intelligence community politely called a non-permissive environment. What that really meant was simple. If they got shot down, no one was coming to save them. Merrick adjusted their altitude, bringing the Osprey even lower. At this height, with the terrain following radar guiding them, they were threading between mountainsides with less than 200 feet of clearance on either side. One wind shear, one mechanical hiccup, and physics would take over. "Widow, this is Overwatch." The voice belonged to the Air Force E-3 Sentry orbiting somewhere high above them, watching the battlespace through radar eyes. "We're tracking multiple hostile air defense systems. Recommend you deviate north, add 12 minutes to your flight time." Merrick's jaw tightened. 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours for the men waiting in that valley. "OVERWATCH negative. We maintain current route." A pause. Then quieter. "Copy, Widow. Your choice." "Be advised, we're showing increased enemy activity in your target area. They know something's up." Of course they did. You didn't lose contact with a SEAL team without enemy forces realizing they'd cornered something valuable. The question was whether those forces had figured out exactly where the Americans were hidden, and whether they'd get reinforcements in place before Merrick could pull her people out. In the cargo bay, Reyes was running through his own preparations. He'd set up the rescue hoist and configured the cabin for rapid evacuation. 12 SEALs plus 2 agency assets meant 14 souls to extract, and they'd have to do it fast. In and out in under 3 minutes, or the whole valley would light up with gunfire. Merrick's helmet display showed the route ahead, a jagged line that snaked through mountain passes and across ridgelines. Each waypoint was a calculated risk, a bet that the terrain would hide them from radar, that enemy forces would be looking in the wrong places, that the weather would hold just long enough. 10 minutes to target, Webb said. He was already adjusting the defensive systems, preparing electronic countermeasures that might give them a few precious seconds if someone launched a missile. "Boss, we've got a problem." Ray's voice cut through the intercom. "The satellite feed just went dark. We're blind on the ground situation." Merrick felt her stomach tighten. Without satellite coverage, they wouldn't know if the compound was still secure, if the SEALs were compromised, if they were flying into an ambush. But turning back wasn't an option. Those men were running out of time, and she was their last hope. "We proceed," she said firmly. "We've got the coordinates. We've got the training. The rest is execution." As if in response, the Osprey hit a pocket of turbulence that rattled the airframe. Through the cockpit window, Merrick could see the mountains rising higher, the valley narrowing to a funnel. Somewhere ahead, in the darkness, 12 men were listening for the sound of salvation. She intended to make sure they heard it. The valley appeared on their sensors before they could see it with their eyes. A black gash between mountains, so narrow that Webb pulled up the terrain mapping 3 times to make sure the data was accurate. It looked less like a flight path and more like a dare. 30 seconds to initial point, Webb called out. His hands hovered over the defensive systems, ready to flood the electromagnetic spectrum with jamming signals if anything hostile lit them up. Merrick began the descent. The Osprey dropped like a stone, nacelles rotating forward to slow their airspeed. The maneuver pressed them both into their seats with forces that would have made a fighter pilot grin. But this wasn't about glory. This was about geometry and physics and split-second timing. Through the night vision display, the compound materialized. A cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall, exactly where the intelligence had placed it. But something was wrong. Merrick's instincts, honed by thousands of hours in cockpits over hostile territory, screamed a warning before her conscious mind could process the details. "Webb, you seeing what I'm seeing?" Her co-pilot zoomed the sensor display. "Christ, that's not the local militia." The thermal imaging showed heat signatures moving with military precision. Too organized, too well-equipped. This wasn't a ragtag group of insurgents. This was a trained force, and they were setting up positions that covered every approach to the compound. "Widow, OVERWATCH, we're picking up radio traffic. Enemy commander is calling for reinforcements. You've got maybe 10 minutes before this valley becomes a shooting gallery. 10 minutes to find 12 men in a compound surrounded by hostiles, extract them, and get clear of terrain that would shred them if they so much as twitched the controls wrong." The math was impossible. Merrick had built a career on making impossible math work. "Going in," she announced. The Osprey dropped into the valley like a hawk on a rabbit. Merrick stood the aircraft on its side, banking hard between cliff faces that scraped close enough to make Webb suck in his breath. The airspeed indicator was dancing, showing them riding the ragged edge between controlled flight and aerodynamic disaster. Behind them in the cargo bay, Reyes was calling out positions. "Clear left, 50 feet. Clear right, 75 feet. Boss, you're threading a needle here." The compound rushed up to meet them. Merrick pulled the Osprey into a hover, rotating the nacelles vertical. The aircraft shuddered in the rotor wash bouncing off the ground. Through the cockpit, she could see muzzle flashes starting to spark from the surrounding hillsides. The enemy had spotted them. "Widow to ground team, we are overhead. Pop smoke now." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then green smoke began billowing from a collapsed doorway on the compound's north side. Not the primary extraction point, not even close. Someone keyed a radio, voice tight with stress. "Widow, this is Hammer 6. We are compromised, taking effective fire. Original LZ is no-go. We're in the cellar beneath the north building. You'll need to bring it in tight." Merrick processed the information in microseconds. The north building had a wall less than 10 feet away. Overhead power lines. And now enemy forces converging from multiple directions. She'd need to bring a 57-foot-wide aircraft into a space designed for maybe half that. Webb looked at her, his expression speaking volumes. This was beyond difficult. This was suicidal. Merrick's hands moved on the controls. "Koa, drop the ramp. We're going in hot." The Osprey lurched sideways as Merrick crabbed the aircraft toward the ruined building. Tracer rounds began stitching through the night, green streaks that looked almost beautiful, until you remembered each one represented someone trying to kill you. The targeting computer screamed warnings about obstacles, about clearances measured in feet and inches. Merrick ignored it all. She flew by instinct now, by feel, her hands and feet making micro-corrections that kept the massive aircraft dancing through a space it had no business occupying. 50 feet. Webb called out. His voice had lost all inflection, becoming a metronome of distance and death. 40 feet. Power lines at 2 o'clock, 20 feet above rotor plane. In the cargo bay, Reyes had the ramp fully extended. He was clipped into a safety harness, leaning out into the maelstrom of dust and debris created by the rotor wash. His voice came through urgent but controlled. "I've got eyes on the team. They're moving to the breach point. Estimate 30 seconds. 30 seconds was an eternity in combat. Merrick watched her instruments, feeling the Osprey buck and shudder as bullets began finding the airframe. Nothing critical yet, but that would change. The enemy was getting their range, adjusting their fire. Through the thermal camera, she could see more heat signatures moving toward the compound. "Widow, this is Overwatch. Be advised, we're tracking 2 technicals mounting heavy weapons converging on your position. ETA 3 minutes. Technical vehicles with heavy machine guns could shred the Osprey's rotors. 3 minutes was all they had, maybe less." The first seal appeared in the thermal display, then another, then a whole stream of them emerging from the collapsed building like ants from a burning mound. They moved with the smooth efficiency of operators who trained together so long they functioned as a single organism. Reyes was counting them off. 1, 2, 3, I count 8, 9. The Osprey shuddered. This time the impact wasn't random fire. Something had hit them hard low on the fuselage. Warning lights cascaded across Merrick's display. Hydraulic failure, secondary system, Webb reported. His hands were already moving through emergency procedures. We're down to primary only. Boss, we take one more hit like that. I know, Merrick's voice was ice. She kept the aircraft steady, refusing to flinch, refusing to let the men on the ground know their ride was damaged. On the thermal display, she could see 3 SEALs moving differently from the others. 2 were being half-carried, their thermal signatures dimmer, cooler, wounded. That explained why they couldn't reach the original landing zone. COA status. Reyes was already moving down the ramp, rushing to help the first operators aboard. I've got 10, 11. Where's 12 through 14? Hammer6's voice came back ragged. Widow, be advised, we have 1 KIA, 2 critical, bringing them now. 1 dead, 2 dying, and an aircraft that might not make it out of the valley even if everything went perfectly from here. Merrick felt something cold settle in her chest. This was the moment that defined aviators, the line between competent and legendary. Some pilots would calculate the odds, realize the aircraft was damaged, see the enemy closing in and make the rational choice to leave. Save the birds, save the crew, sacrifice the few to protect the many. But Merrick hadn't earned the call sign Widow by making rational choices. She'd earned it by bringing people home, every single time, no matter the cost. Webb, give me everything the engines have. COA, as soon as the last man touches the ramp, you tell me. The seconds stretched like hours. Merrick held the Osprey in a hover that was slowly destroying the aircraft systems, each moment in this impossible position pushing components beyond their design limits. The rotor wash created a miniature storm, hurling debris and dust in every direction. Enemy fighters were getting closer. She could see their muzzle flashes now with her naked eye, not just through sensors. They were maybe 100 yards out, massing for an assault. If they got any closer, small arms fire would make the cargo bay a killing zone. Rey's voice cut through the chaos. Last man on the ramp, go, go, go. Merrick didn't hesitate. Her hands moved in a choreographed sequence burned into muscle memory by 10,000 hours of flight time. Power, collective, cyclic. The Osprey clawed skyward even as the nacelles began their transition to forward flight. The aircraft shook like a dog shedding water, protesting the violence being done to its systems. Then the right engine coughed. Every warning in the cockpit lit up simultaneously, a Christmas tree of red and amber that represented multiple cascading failures. The hydraulic damage had compromised engine cooling, and at maximum power the turbine was eating itself alive. Engine 2 is failing. Webb's voice finally carried emotion, fear wrapped in professionalism. Temperatures off the scale, oil pressure dropping. Merrick adjusted, trying to keep the aircraft level as it became increasingly asymmetric. Flying on one engine was possible in an Osprey. Flying on one engine while climbing out of a narrow valley with a dozen men and battle damage was something else entirely. The mountain wall filled the windscreen. At their current rate of climb, they'd hit the ridgeline about 3 seconds before they cleared it. Simple physics, immutable as gravity. Brace! Merrick screamed into the intercom. She pulled the nose up, trading airspeed for altitude in a gamble that would either save them or kill them all. The Osprey's stall warning began shrieking, the computer informing her that she was about to drop the aircraft out of the sky. The ridgeline passed beneath them with maybe 10 feet to spare. Merrick felt the aircraft shudder as the lower fuselage scraped rock, heard metal grinding against stone. Then they were clear, diving down the far side of the mountain into the relative safety of the next valley. Behind them, the compound was a carnival of muzzle flashes and confusion, enemy forces shooting at a target that had vanished like smoke. Webb was going through emergency procedures, but even his usual calm was cracking. Engine 2 is gone, complete failure. We're on one engine with partial hydraulics and about 100 other problems. Boss, we need to find somewhere to set down. Now. Merrick checked their position. They were still deep in hostile territory, at least 50 miles from friendly lines. Setting down here meant abandoning the aircraft and trying to evade on foot with 2 critically wounded men and a bird that would give away their position like a beacon. How long can we stay airborne? She asked. Webb did the math. Maybe 30 minutes. Then we're landing, choice or not. 30 minutes to cross 50 miles of enemy territory on one engine. The odds were worse than the extraction had been. From the cargo bay, a new voice came through the intercom. Calm, authoritative, strained with pain but unbroken. "Widow, this is Hammer 6. Hell of a pickup. Thanks for not leaving us." Lieutenant Commander Briggs. One of the wounded men was Briggs. The revelation hit Merrick like a physical blow, but her hands never wavered on the controls. The Osprey limped through the night sky, its single remaining engine screaming in protest. Behind her in the cargo bay, a SEAL medic was working on two men who were bleeding out. One of them was the man who'd mocked her in the conference room 6 hours ago. Karma had a sense of humor, apparently. Webb was on the radio with OVERWATCH, trying to coordinate an emergency landing site. But every option was bad. They were too far for a quick reaction force to reach, too damaged to make it to the nearest secure airfield, and flying over terrain that offered nowhere safe to put down. "Widow, OVERWATCH. We're scrambling a combat air patrol to provide top cover, but they're 12 minutes out. You're on your own until then." 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours. The damaged engine was leaving a thermal signature that every enemy air defense system within 50 miles could track. They were wounded prey, and the predators were circling. Reyes came forward from the cargo bay, squeezing into the cockpit. His flight suit was dark with blood, not his own. "Boss, I need you to listen. Hammer 6 Briggs, he took shrapnel to the femoral artery. The medic got it controlled, but he's critical. The other guy, agency asset, he's worse. Maybe an hour if we're lucky." "I'm to friendly territory at current speed?" Merrick asked. Webb didn't sugarcoat it. 43 minutes, and that's if the engine holds. An hour versus 43 minutes. Math that meant life or death, calculated in minutes of blood loss versus rotor rotation. Merrick felt her mind working the problem from every angle, looking for the solution that textbooks said didn't exist. Then the damaged engine made the decision for her. A bang resonated through the airframe, followed by violent shaking. Webb's voice went flat. "Fire light engine 2, fire suppression activated." The engine was fully dead now and worse, burning. The suppression system would kill the fire, but the dead engine created massive drag. Their airspeed dropped and with it their range. "New numbers," Merrick said. Webb's fingers flew across the computer. The answer came back in seconds, and it was a death sentence. "We won't make friendly lines, not even close. We'll be on the ground in 28 minutes, about 30 miles short." 30 miles. Might as well be 30,000. No one could hold out that long against enemy forces in their own territory. Merrick's mind raced through the tactical situation. Then she saw it. A solution so risky it bordered on insanity, but it was there, shimmering like a mirage. "Webb, pull up the map. Show me Highway 6. The highway was a smuggling route that ran north-south through the region. Intelligence reported it was used by enemy forces, but also by neutral parties, locals just trying to survive. More importantly, it was paved and straight for about 2 miles through a relatively flat section. It could work as a runway if they were impossibly lucky. Webb understood immediately. "You want to land on an enemy-controlled highway." "I want to not crash in the mountains," Merrick corrected. "The highway just happens to be there." It was a distinction without a difference, and they both knew it. Landing meant abandoning the aircraft. It meant being stranded deep in hostile territory. But it also meant those wounded men might survive long enough to be rescued. Reyes leaned forward. "Boss, if we land, we're committed. No taking off again, not with this damage." Merrick's hands were steady on the controls. "Then we better make sure someone comes to get us." The decision made, everything else became execution. Webb began transmitting their intentions to Overwatch while Merrick adjusted course toward Highway 6. The route took them even deeper into enemy territory, over terrain that made her skin crawl. Every valley could hide an ambush, every ridgeline a missile team. The Osprey groaned and shuddered, its single engine pushed far beyond safe operating limits. Merrick could feel every vibration through the controls, could hear every mechanical protest. The aircraft was dying by degrees, and she was racing to get it to the ground before it made that decision without her input. 5 minutes to the highway, Webb announced. He'd pulled up satellite imagery studying the approach. It's going to be tight. We've got power lines on the north end and what looks like a bridge about halfway down our landing roll. We'll need to thread between them, threading needles. That seemed to be Merrick's specialty. In the cargo bay, Reyes was preparing for impact. Securing equipment, making sure the wounded were strapped down. The SEALs who could still function were checking weapons, preparing for the firefight that would inevitably follow. They defended compromised landing zones before, but never this deep, never this isolated. Hammer Six's voice came through, weaker than before but still carrying command authority. Widow, when we're on the ground, my team will establish a perimeter. You and your crew get to cover. We'll hold until extraction arrives. Merrick almost laughed. The man could barely speak, was probably minutes from bleeding out, and he was still trying to run the tactical situation. Negative, Hammer Six. When we're on the ground, you're going to stay down and let your team do their job. That's an order. A pause, then quieter. Roger, Widow. The highway materialized in the darkness ahead. Merrick began her approach, converting the Osprey back to helicopter mode. The nacelles rotated vertical, and the single working rotor bit into the air. The aircraft wallowed unbalanced, fighting her. This was going to be ugly. 100 feet, Webb called out. Airspeed 40 knots, descending 500 per minute. Too fast. Merrick adjusted, but the Osprey's damaged systems weren't responding the way they should. The aircraft seemed to want to fall out of the sky, and she was running out of altitude to correct. 50 feet. 40. Power lines at 12 o'clock, 50 feet out. Merrick saw them, thin dark lines against the stars. She adjusted left, feeling the aircraft drift. The Osprey's landing gear touched asphalt with a shriek of tortured metal. They bounced, came down again harder. Merrick fought the controls, keeping the birds straight as they skidded down the highway. The bridge Webb had spotted rushed at them. Not enough time to stop. Merrick did the only thing she could. She yanked the collective, popping the Osprey back into the air for maybe 10 feet, just enough to clear the bridge's approach. They came down on the far side, and this time when the wheels hit pavement they stayed down. The Osprey slid for another 100 yards before finally shuddering to a stop. Merrick secured the engine, watching the instruments wind down into silence. Around them the night was suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. No rotor noise, no engine whine, just the tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of dogs barking in some unseen village. Reyes was already dropping the ramp. 30 seconds to perimeter. The SEALs moved like shadows, dispersing into the darkness to establish defensive positions. Merrick unstrapped and grabbed the rifle secured behind her seat. Webb did the same. They weren't pilots anymore. They were survivors, and the enemy knew exactly where they were. The highway stretched in both directions like a ribbon of darkness. Merrick took up position behind the Osprey's landing gear, her rifle trained on the southern approach. Webb covered the north. The SEALs had vanished into the terrain flanking the road, invisible even to her night vision. Somewhere in that darkness, they were setting up ambush positions and preparing surprises for anyone foolish enough to approach. Minutes crawled by. Merrick's breathing settled into the combat rhythm she'd learned years ago, calm, steady, ready. Her mind wasn't racing anymore. Combat did that. It stripped away everything but the moment, the target, the trigger. Reyes had stayed in the cargo bay with the wounded and the agency assets. Through her earpiece she could hear the medic working, his voice low and urgent. Briggs was still hanging on, but barely. The other asset had minutes, maybe. Webb spoke without moving his eyes from his sector. OVERWATCH reports the quick reaction force is 30 minutes out. Gunships are 15. 15 minutes was an eternity. The enemy already knew they were here. The smoking hulk of an American military aircraft on a major highway wasn't exactly subtle. Merrick pressed her radio. All positions, sound off. One by one, the SEALs checked in. Hammer 2 through Hammer 11, minus the casualties. 10 shooters plus her 3-person crew. 13 against whatever enemy forces were converging on this position. The night exploded, not with gunfire but with light. Headlights appeared on both ends of the highway, at least a dozen vehicles. They stopped just outside effective rifle range, and Merrick could see figures dismounting, organizing, planning. These weren't hot-headed militiamen who'd rush in. These were professionals who understood that wounded Americans were still lethal Americans. A loudspeaker crackled to life, the voice speaking accented English. "American pilot, you are surrounded. Surrender and we will give you medical treatment. Resist and you will die here." Webb glanced at Merrick. "They're not wrong. We can't hold against those numbers." Merrick's finger rested alongside her rifle's trigger guard. She thought about the men in the cargo bay, about Briggs bleeding out, about the crew who'd trusted her to get them home. She thought about the mocking tone in the conference room and how it had transformed to respect, and how none of that mattered now because they were all just trying to survive. "We don't need to hold," she said quietly. "We just need to last 15 minutes. The SEALs had apparently reached the same conclusion. Hammertoo, the senior operator still mobile, came over the radio. "Widow, we're going to make them pay for every inch. Keep your heads down and trust the night." What happened next would be taught in special operations schools for years. The SEALs didn't defend. They attacked. Using the darkness and terrain, they hit the enemy forces from unexpected angles, sowing chaos and confusion. Gunfire erupted from 3 different positions simultaneously. Enemy vehicles exploded as grenades found fuel tanks. Merrick stayed in position, watching her sector, trusting the operators to do their work. She wasn't a SEAL, wasn't trained in their tactics. Her job was to make sure nothing came through her field of fire. Something did. A pickup truck broke from the northern group, accelerating hard down the highway. The driver had apparently decided speed was better than caution. He was wrong. Merrick's rifle came up smoothly. She'd qualified expert on every weapon the Navy issued, but shooting paper targets and shooting at someone trying to kill you were different animals. She took a breath, let it half out, and squeezed. The pickup's windshield starred as her rounds found the driver. The truck swerved, clipped the guardrail, and flipped. It tumbled 3 times before coming to rest upside down, fuel spilling across the asphalt. Merrick's hands were steady as she acquired a new target. Muscle memory and training overrode the small voice in her head asking what she'd just done. Webb fired twice, methodical and precise, dropping enemy fighters who'd advanced too far into the open. "Nice shooting, Commander." His voice was conversational, like they were at a range instead of fighting for their lives. The enemy forces pulled back, regrouping. The SEALs melted back into defensive positions. The highway fell silent again except for the crackle of burning vehicles and the distant pop of ammunition cooking off. Merrick checked her watch. 8 minutes had passed. 7 more to go. "Widow, Hammertoo, they're flanking through the East Ravine. We're repositioning to counter." The calm in the SEAL's voice was remarkable. He might have been describing a training exercise instead of a tactical situation that could collapse at any moment. Movement caught Merrick's eye. More vehicles approaching, but these were different, heavier. Military hardware, not civilian trucks. APCs with mounted weapons that could shred the Osprey and everyone around it. "Webb, we've got armor." Her co-pilot saw it too. His expression tightened. "Those are BTR-80s, 30mm cannons. If they open up." He didn't need to finish. They all understood. Small arms fire they could handle. Armored vehicles with automatic cannons were a different problem entirely. Hammertoo's voice came through, still calm but with an edge. "Widow, we don't have anything that'll stop those. We need those gunships now." Merrick pressed her radio, connecting to OVERWATCH. "Widow to OVERWATCH, we're taking contact from armored vehicles. Request immediate fire support." The response was immediate but not encouraging. "Widow, OVERWATCH. Gunships are 6 minutes out. Can you hold 6 minutes?" The BTRs were advancing slowly, their commanders clearly aware that the Americans were trapped. They didn't need to rush. Time was on their side. Merrick looked at the Osprey behind her. The dead engine, the battle damage, the wounded men inside who'd run out of time long before 6 minutes elapsed. She looked at Webb, at rays visible through the cargo bay, at the darkness where the SEALs were making impossible odds last just a little longer. Then she remembered something. "Webb, the Osprey's defensive systems, are they still operational?" Her co-pilot's eyes widened as he understood. "The countermeasures? Yeah, they should be. But boss, those are designed for missiles and radar. They won't stop. They'll blind them." Merrick was already moving back toward the cockpit. "If we pop everything at once, flares, chaff, active jamming, it'll give us 30 seconds of confusion, maybe more." Webb followed her up the ramp. "And then we're defenseless." Then we better make those 30 seconds count. She dropped into her seat, hands moving across panels she could operate by touch. The Osprey's defensive suite was designed for aerial threats, but the principles worked on the ground too. Chaff would bloom on radar like a supernova. Flares would blind thermal optics. Electronic warfare systems would scramble radio communications. It wouldn't stop the armor, but it might buy the seconds they needed. Hammer 2, get ready for a fireworks show. When I pop the countermeasures, they'll be blind. That's your window. The SEAL rogered without asking for explanations. Merrick's fingers hovered over the master arm switch. Around her, the Osprey's cockpit was dark and silent, systems powered down to reduce their thermal signature. Through the windscreen, she could see the BTRs advancing in formation, their commanders confident in their overwhelming firepower. Webb had moved back to the cargo bay to help secure the wounded. If this went wrong, if the armor simply opened up and shredded them, Merrick wanted her last act to give the wounded men the best chance. It was a small thing, meaningless in the grand scheme, but it mattered to her. She thought about the path that had brought her here. 20 years in naval aviation, fighting for every promotion, every assignment, every chance to prove herself. Male pilots with half her flight hours got fast-tracked to command, while she'd been shuttled to second-tier squadrons and non-combat billets. She'd accumulated more carrier landings than most pilots ever attempted, more combat hours than officers twice her age, and still found herself explaining her qualifications to men who'd barely logged time in simulators. The call sign Widow hadn't come from a noble place. It had come from a squadron commander who thought he was being clever, implying she was cursed, that crews who flew with her wouldn't return. He'd meant it as an insult, a way to undermine her credibility. She'd taken it and made it armor. Yes, she was the Widow. She was the pilot who came back alone because she delivered her crews safely home and volunteered to fly the missions no one else would accept. She was the aviator who collected ghosts, not of the dead, but of the living she'd pulled from impossible situations. Briggs was just the latest, the newest ghost who'd lived because she refused to calculate odds that said they should all die. Hammer 2, execute on my mark. Merrick's hand closed on the switch. The BTRs were 200 yards out, point-blank range for their cannons. 3, 2, mark. She flipped the switch. The Osprey's defensive systems discharged in a coordinated sequence that lit the night like a battlefield from another century. Flares streaked skyward in dozens of brilliant arcs, each burning white-hot magnesium that seared the darkness. Chaff bloomed in metallic clouds that would paint radar screens with false targets. Electronic warfare systems pulsed active jamming across every frequency, turning radios into static generators. For 5 seconds, the highway became daylight. Enemy forces froze, blinded by the sudden brilliance. Thermal optics whited out. Radio communications dissolved into noise. And in that moment of confusion, the SEALs struck. Precision fire from concealed positions, targeting the BTR's vision blocks and external sensors. They couldn't penetrate armor, but they could ensure the crews remained blind even after the flares burned out. One of the vehicles attempted to rotate its turret, searching for targets. Hammer 2 had positioned himself specifically for this. The Carl Gustav recoilless rifle on his shoulder barked once, and the shaped charge caught the BTR in its relatively thin top armor. The vehicle brewed up, flames erupting from hatches as its ammunition cooked off. The other vehicles halted, their commanders suddenly uncertain. They'd expected wounded Americans waiting to die. Instead, they'd found professionals who made every second cost blood. Through her headset, Merrick heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Widow, Phantom 1-1, we have you visual. Request marked target. The AC-130 gunship had arrived early. Merrick grabbed a flare gun from the survival kit and stepped out onto the highway. She fired once, the red star cluster climbing lazily into the sky. Phantom 1-1 marked, enemy armor vicinity my position, danger close. The gunship pilot's response carried professional concern. Widow, danger close is within 200 meters. You're asking us to fire at less than half that. Strongly advise you take cover. Merrick was already moving back toward the Osprey. Phantom, we're all the cover there is. You're cleared hot. What followed was a demonstration of precision violence that redefined the term close air support. The AC-130 sensors had identified every enemy vehicle and fighting position around the crashed Osprey. The gunship's 105 howitzer spoke first, high-explosive rounds that walked up the highway and obliterated the remaining BTRs. Then the 40 cannon took over, stitching through enemy positions with surgical accuracy. The enemy forces broke. Those who could still move abandoned their vehicles and fled into the darkness. The SEALs let them go. This wasn't about body count. It was about survival. The sudden silence after the gunship's fire was disorienting. Merrick's ears rang despite her hearing protection. She could smell burning metal and cordite, could feel the heat from cooking off ammunition and flaming vehicles. Around her, the SEALs were securing the perimeter, but their movements had changed. The combat urgency had shifted to relief, cautious but growing. They'd held. Against overwhelming odds in terrain that favored the enemy, they'd held long enough. Widow, Phantom 1-1, we own the sky. Quick reaction force is 3 minutes out with medevac birds. You did good. Merrick sagged against the Osprey's landing gear. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Webb appeared beside her, his face streaked with dirt and powder residue. Boss, we need to check on the wounded. They moved into the cargo bay together. The medic was still working on Briggs, but he looked up as they entered. His expression told the story before words could. He's stable, lost a lot of blood, but he'll make it. The agency asset had died 5 minutes ago quietly while the battle raged outside. The medic had done everything possible, but some wounds were beyond field medicine. Merrick knelt beside Briggs. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. Someone had draped a thermal blanket over him, but she could still see the blood-soaked bandages on his leg. As if sensing her presence, his eyes opened. For a moment they were unfocused, pain-glazed. Then they sharpened, found her face. "Hey," he whispered. His voice was weak but carried a weight that had nothing to do with volume. "Yeah, you know my rank yet." His attempt at a smile was more grimace than humor, but Merrick felt something unknot in her chest. If he could joke, he was going to survive. "Commander," he continued, each word an effort. "I was wrong about you, about everything. I'm sorry." Merrick placed a hand on his shoulder, careful to avoid his injuries. "Save it. You're going to have plenty of time to apologize when you're back stateside." He shook his head slightly. "Need to say it now, need you to know." His eyes held hers. "You're the best pilot I've ever flown with, and I've flown with some legends." The helicopter sounds grew louder. Multiple birds, heavy lift capability enough to extract everyone and secure the area. The quick reaction force was arriving in strength. Merrick stood, making room for the medic to continue his work. Outside, SEALs were already popping chem lights to mark the landing zone. Professional to the end. The medevac birds touched down in formation, their crews moving with practiced efficiency. Litters were produced, the wounded transferred with care that balanced speed and gentleness. Merrick watched Briggs being loaded onto the lead helicopter, the corpsman already running IV lines and checking vitals. The other casualties followed. 8 SEALs who could walk under their own power, 2 who couldn't, 1 who never would again. The Quick Reaction Force commander, a Marine Corps major with silver wings and too many combat deployments in his eyes, approached Merrick. "Commander, I've got security elements setting up a perimeter. We'll hold here until the recovery team can lift out your bird." He paused, studying the shot-up Osprey. "Though I'm not sure there's enough left to recover." Merrick looked at the aircraft that had carried them through impossible odds. Bullet holes stitched across the fuselage. One engine completely destroyed. Hydraulic fluid pooling beneath the airframe like blood. The bird that had been her weapon, her shield, her salvation. "She got us here," Merrick said quietly. "That's enough." The major nodded, understanding passing between them in the way of people who'd both asked machines to do the impossible. "Your crew's riding out with the first lift. You should be on it." Protocol said he was right. The mission commander should evacuate with her crew and cargo. But Merrick found herself hesitating, looking at the Osprey one more time. Webb appeared at her elbow. "Boss, bird's waiting. Koa's already aboard." Still, she hesitated. The major's radio squawked with traffic, tactical updates, and logistics coordination. He listened, then looked back at Merrick with new interest. "Commander, I'm getting word from higher. SECNAV wants a personal debrief. They're calling this Operation Widow's Walk. He shook his head in amazement. In 48 hours, you'll be briefing admirals. Next month, probably the president. This is going to be one for the history books. Merrick felt something twist inside her. History books, awards, commendations. The kind of recognition she'd fought for, bled for, that had been denied her for 20 years. And all it had cost was one night of violence, one impossible extraction, one roll of the dice that could have killed everyone who trusted her. I just wanted to bring them home, she said. Major's expression softened. That's what makes it count, Commander. The helicopter's crew chief was making hurry-up gestures. Time to leave, time to let the professionals recover what could be recovered and abandon the rest. Merrick took 3 steps toward the helicopter, then stopped. She walked back to the Osprey, placed her hand on the scarred fuselage. Metal still warm from battle, rough beneath her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she turned and walked to the waiting helicopter without looking back. The bird lifted off, banking away from the highway that had become a battlefield. Below, the Marines were already setting charges, preparing to deny the enemy any intelligence value from the wreckage. The Osprey would be destroyed, its secrets turned to slag and smoke. As they climbed, Merrick could see the full tactical situation. The burned-out enemy vehicles, the positions where SEALs had held impossible ground, the smoldering ruins that marked where the AC-130 had written its violence across the landscape. From altitude, it looked like a textbook operation. Clean, professional, successful. From ground level, it had been chaos and terror and split-second decisions made with incomplete information. Both perspectives were true. That was the nature of combat. The flight back to friendly territory took 40 minutes. Merrick sat in silence, strapped into the nylon seat of the medevac bird, watching her crew. Reyes had his eyes closed, but his hand still gripped his rifle. Webb stared out the window at the darkness sliding past. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say yet. The things they'd done tonight would need time to settle, to transform from immediate experience into memory and then into story. Around them, the rescued SEALs occupied that peculiar space warriors inhabited after combat, exhausted but too wired to rest, present in body but mind still processing the violence. One of them, Hammerfor, caught Merrick's eye and nodded once. Respect, acknowledgement, the wordless communication of people who'd survived together. The medevac bird touched down at Forward Operating Base Kaufman 90 minutes before dawn. Medical personnel swarmed the wounded, whisking them toward the surgical suite. Merrick and her crew were directed to the transient quarters, told to get food and rest and that someone would brief them in 6 hours. She made it to the quarters, made it through the door, and then her legs simply gave out. Webb caught her arm, steady as always. "Easy, boss, adrenaline's wearing off." "I'm fine," Merrick said automatically. Then more honestly, "I'm not fine, but I will be." Reyes had already claimed a bunk and was methodically stripping and cleaning his rifle. The ritual of it, the familiar mechanical sequence, seemed to center him. "We should talk about what happened out there," he said without looking up. "Process it." Webb shook his head. "Tomorrow, right now, we need sleep." But sleep didn't come easily. Merrick lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision, every maneuver. The things that had gone right through skill, and the things that had gone right through sheer luck. The line between the two was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. Somewhere on this base, doctors were working on Briggs, reconstructing the artery she'd kept intact just barely long enough. Somewhere else, another doctor was zipping a body bag over the agency asset who'd run out of time despite everyone's best efforts. And in conference rooms and command centers scattered across 3 continents, people were already transforming tonight's chaos into briefings and reports, into lessons learned and tactics to replicate. She thought about the Admiral's words, alpha priority, the highest level of operational authority, granted only when failure was unacceptable. She'd succeeded by the only metric that mattered, body count of friendlies extracted versus lost. 13 saved, 1 KIA. In the mathematics of war, that was a victory. It didn't feel like one. Victory was supposed to feel clean, triumphant. This felt like she'd been run through a meat grinder and somehow stumbled out the other side mostly intact. Her hands ached from gripping the controls. Her ears rang from weapons fire. Her mind kept circling back to the moment she decided to land on that highway, to commit them all to a course of action that had no retreat.